the relation between theory and practice, philosophy and soteriology, Nagarjuna emphasizes the two-way streets in this neighborhood. Understanding emptiness leads one to grasp less, to become more detached. Relaxing one's tendency to grasp leads to a realization of emptiness. Philosophy, meditation, and the practice of the moral virtues that issue in the relaxation of grasping are conceived from this vantage point as necessarily mutually supportive.
4. When views of I and mine are extinguished, whether with respect to the internal or external, the appropriator ceases. This having ceased, birth ceases. When one completely relinquishes the view of entities and the self as inherently existent, and when all habits of reification have been eliminated, Nagarjuna urges, liberation from cyclic existence and suffering have been achieved. Nagarjuna defers the precise characterization of nirvana to the chapter devoted to its examination and that devoted to the examination of the status of the Tathagata, XXV and XXI, respectively.
5. Action and misery having ceased, there is nirvana. Action and misery come from conceptual thought. This comes from mental fabrication. Fabrication ceases through emptiness. The diagnosis, though, of the predicament of samsara and the corresponding prescription are clear: grasping, contaminated action, and suffering are rooted in delusion, and this delusion comes from cognitive error. The root delusion, the fundamental cognitive error, is the confusion of merely conventional existence with inherent existence. The realization of emptiness eliminates that fabrication of essence, which eliminates grasping, contaminated action, and its pernicious consequences.
6. That there is a self has been taught, and the doctrine of no self, by the Buddhists, as well as the doctrine of neither self nor non-self. There are many discussions of the way to think about the self in the Buddhist canon. For those who are nihilistic about the self, such as contemporary eliminative materialists or classical Indian Carvakas, it is important to explain the conventional reality of the self. For those who tend to reify the self, the doctrine of no self is taught, that is, the doctrine of the emptiness of the self. But, Nagarjuna claims, as a preamble to the next verse, there is a deeper view of the matter, a doctrine of neither self nor non-self. That doctrine is closely tied to that of the emptiness of emptiness. Both the terms self and no self, together with any conceptions that can be associated with them, Nagarjuna claims, are conventional designations. They may each be soteriologically and analytically useful antidotes to extreme metaphysical views and to the disturbances those views occasion. But to neither corresponds an entity, neither a thing that we could ever find on analysis and identify with the self, nor a thing or state that we could identify with no self. The terms and the properties they designate are themselves empty, despite the fact that they are used to designate emptiness. To say neither self nor no self is, from this perspective, not to shrug one's shoulders in indecision, but to recognize that while each of these is a useful characterization of the situation for some purposes, neither can be understood as correctly ascribing a property to an independently existent entity. And if they cannot be understood in this way, what are we really saying?
7. What language expresses is non-existent. The sphere of thought is non-existent. Unarisen and unceased, like nirvana, is the nature of things. This insight is developed further in this verse. Here Nagarjuna begins to move towards his famous and surprising identification of nirvana with samsara, and of emptiness with conventional reality. This identification of what in earlier Buddhism were regarded as wholly different from one another, and this characterization of the mundane in terms heretofore reserved for the putatively transcendent, are among Nagarjuna's most radical and original moves and are central to the development of a distinctively Mahayana outlook. In the first two lines, he reiterates that there are no actual convention-independent entities that correspond to the ostensible referring terms or predicates in our language. But, he argues, from the emptiness of things, it follows that they never either arise or cease. This does not mean that they are permanent, of course. Rather it means that while arising and ceasing and consequent impermanence are features of all conventional phenomena and are among the features that make them empty, from the ultimate point of view, as was argued in Chapter 7, there is no ultimate basis for arising and ceasing. But if nirvana is liberation from cyclic existence and hence from arising and ceasing, it follows that, from the ultimate standpoint, all things in samsara are actually just as they are in nirvana.
8. Everything is real and is not real, both real and not real. Neither real nor not real. This is Lord Buddha's teaching. This is the positive tetralemma regarding existence. Everything is conventionally real. Everything is ultimately unreal, that is, not unreal in just any sense, but unreal when seen from the ultimate standpoint. Everything has both characteristics, that is, everything is both conventionally real and ultimately unreal. Nothing is ultimately real or completely non-existent. That is, everything is neither real in one sense nor not real in another sense. Interestingly, the tetralemma can also be asserted in a negative form with some of the same force: nothing is real, ultimately. Nothing is not real, everything has a kind of reality. Nothing is both real and not real, in the same sense that would be contradictory. Nothing is neither real nor not real, the law of the excluded middle. Both forms of the tetralemma are found in this text. See XXI, 11.
9. Not dependent on another, peaceful and not fabricated by mental fabrication. Not thought, without distinctions. That is the character of reality, that-ness. That is, independent of conceptual imputation there are no objects, no identities, and so, no distinctions. But of course, as Kant would agree, there is no way that we can think such a reality. Nonetheless, Nagarjuna argues, and Kant still agrees, we must see that that is the ultimate truth about things, though it might in its nature be inexpressible and inconceivable.
10. Whatever comes into being dependent on another is not identical to that thing. Nor is it different from it. Therefore it is neither non-existent in time nor permanent. Here Nagarjuna recapitulates a brief analysis of what it is for a phenomenon to be dependently arisen. But in the context of the deeper understanding of emptiness and of the relation between the ultimate and the conventional developed in this chapter, a deeper reading of this verse is in order. Our attention is called to the fact that the analysis of dependency developed here and consequently of the conventional reality and ultimate non-existence of the dependent is at the same time a correct conventional characterization of the nature of phenomena and an ostension of the fact that it is only a conventional designation of a nature that must remain uncharacterizable.
11. By the Buddhas, patrons of the world, this immortal truth is taught. Without identity, without distinction, not non-existent in time, not permanent. That is, this doctrine itself is also empty. It is conventionally real, ultimately non-existent, dependent, impermanent, and has a nature in itself that can never be characterized. The final verse is an admonishment to meditate seriously on this argument. For by understanding clearly the nature of the self and of the entities to which it is related, Nagarjuna believes that one can attain Buddhahood. That is why he emphasizes that with a correct view, even without a teacher or a Buddha to instruct one, a patient meditator can attain her own awakening.
12. When the fully enlightened ones do not appear, and when the disciples have disappeared, the wisdom of the self-enlightened ones will arise completely without a teacher.